So what is degrowth? What is post-growth? What is growth? We have to sort of define a little bit what these things are. Economic growth is what we often refer to see how GDP is growing. GDP is the main measure for economic growth, and it's a measure that just quantifies value in a way that is being created in an economy, often on a national level. And so everybody knows that this is not a very good measure because it measures both, volumes of prosperity, such as, I don't know, money or whatever. But it also measures things like accidents and all kinds of things where you also make money from in some ways. And so it's not a very good measure to determine human well-being. And it's also not a very good measure to see things in excess of equality and inequality. It's not a very good measure to measure biodiversity and planetary boundaries and effects on that. And so in that sense, people have been looking for a long time for alternative economic indicators that would measure people's well-being. And the degrowth movement is sort of one of the movements that it has been very interesting in both looking at the well-being aspect of humans, but also of, let's say, the well-being of ecosystems and living within planetary boundaries. Because at the moment, 6 of 9 planetary boundaries have been breached, and we're dangerously close to various collapses of ecosystems and inalterable or sort of tipping points that will bring all kinds of parts of the environment to a point where it's really hard to go back. And that has been theorized quite a lot by Johan Rockström and people around him. So if we talk about beyond growth, that's sort of what we mean. We would like to integrate this whole field that has been emerging for 15 years around planetary boundaries and how to live well within planetary boundaries, and also to make happen a kind of transition that hasn't even started, that would bring us to this planetary boundary within time to avoid climate catastrophe. That is the kind of challenge that is posed. On the one hand, we have measures of unwell-being that are very high, like related to inequality, related to north-south sort of exploitation, related to also a labor division and sort of the for instance, feminist takes on what an economy of care would look like, things like this, but then also planetary boundaries. And so in that sense, Timothy Parikh, who's one of the researchers that's most like visible in the post-growth and degrowth movements, he puts it like this, that for him, degrowth is the way and the destination is post-growth in a way. And there's a lot of people that have a big problem with degrowth because it's sort of it goes against the grain of the big ideology in economics. And so in that sense, it's completely difficult for economists to hear it because it's against the central dogma of progress. And one of the first things that you will hear if you mention it to economists is that, this kind of like, yeah, but we cannot go back. We cannot unmake the progress that we've made and we're living well. Because in most of the orthodox economics that is being applied today, in all kinds of contexts, we do not have any sort of consideration of ecological economics or any consideration of human well-being, because also there the GDP is the dominant measure. So Timothy Parikh says that degrowth is the process to get to post-growth, and it is not a recession. The recession doesn't necessarily help on the way. It's really a planned process of limiting the destructive aspects of the economy in order to get to a post-growth society by having various policy measures put in place. One thing in terms of policy that is talked about quite a lot today is, of course, climate policy. We have decarbonization objectives by 2030, 2050, whatever, on an international scale, parts of the Paris Treaty, and then also sort of translated into national governments. But we might not have roadmaps that are really leaning to the scientific necessity of reducing carbon in the atmosphere in time to get to a place where we could limit warming or heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius. At the moment, we're breaching all the objectives. We're not really doing it. And we're on track to pass 1.5 by 2025. And yeah, so that doesn't necessarily look good. So I would like to talk a little bit about the sorts of policies that post-growth or beyond growth policies are sort of based on, and it could include, so that you can start to imagine what this world could actually look like. So basically what we need to do, we need to really get to biocapacity. We're at the moment beyond planetary boundaries. We're overshooting by a lot, which means that we're actively destroying the future in all kinds of ways, in terms of resource use, in terms of carbon outputs, in terms of our consumption and material throughputs. So what we need to do is we need to not have like small incremental changes on a personal level, but massive global scale industry dismantling, including the fossil fuel industry, limits to raw material extraction, nature protection and restoration measures for really creating healthy and resilient soils, forests, marine and other ecosystems. And then also targets including binding material footprint reductions and also very real area-based nature restoration, which means that we need to have baselines for before and what sort of biodiversity we want to see there and what sort of carbon we would like to stock in the soil, for instance. That's the policies around biocapacity. There is a whole thing. Secondly, there's a whole thing around fairness, where we need fiscal instruments to foster a more equal society, whereby we need to stop income and wealth extremes and also super profits. So carbon wealth tax, minimum, maximum incomes, and then also integrating things that are currently not valued in our economy, meaning care, meaning environment, meaning non-extractivist approaches to restoring sorts of historical injustices and really integrating anti-colonialist and anti-extractive ways to deal with the other, and all kinds of our relationality is really at question here. Third is really well-being for all. What does that mean? Earth for all and well-being for all. So it would mean secured access to essential infrastructures via an improved ecologically sensitive welfare state. Because currently we have the welfare state, but it's not ecologically sensitive. So we could integrate things like universal basic services, and that could sort of have the right to health, the right to transport, to care, to housing, education and social protection services, but also job guarantees and price controls for essential goods and services for everybody. And we would need to define what these essential goods and services include. And then the other aspect is the democratic aspect, where at the moment we have a system that is based on a political short-termism. It's essentially hijacked by various tendencies, let's say, in the information ecology that is also very broken. And so what we would need to do is to have citizen assemblies, really mobilize everybody to formulate socially acceptable sufficiency strategies and strengthen policies based on ecological limits, fairness, and well-being for all. And also have like a stronger role for trade unions, so look at local needs fora, climate conventions, as well as participatory budgeting on the local level. So there's various levels here that come into play and that will play.
Action!